My name is Olwen Alexander and I work at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh in the UK, where I teach English for academic purposes, or EAP. This involves helping students to improve their language and their study competence, either before they enter university or while they're studying there. This type of language teaching draws ideas from research in disciplines such as applied linguistics and from education more generally. Now, I'm not an academic researcher, but I do try to keep up to date by reading about research developments in these related fields. This helps me to better understand the learning processes that are going on in my classrooms and any problems I might encounter there. I particularly enjoy writing materials for my EAP students, and with my colleague Sue Argent, I've recently published 2 course books. Both of them are called Access EAP. Access EAP Foundations is for students at a lower level of language proficiency. So that's about pre-intermediate or B1 on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. Access EAP Frameworks is the higher level book for students who are just about ready to enter university. During the piloting of Access EAP Foundations, I conducted a small-scale study looking at teacher beliefs about teaching EAP to students with this low proficiency level. And this was published in the Journal of English for Academic Purposes in June 2012. So I'm going to talk about what prompted this study and some of the findings. Now, the problem which got me interested in researching teacher beliefs came out of discussions I've had over the years with communicative language teachers who want to make the move to teaching English for academic purposes. The focus in these 2 types of teaching is quite different, but in fact there's little formal training available, at least not in the UK, to support CLT teachers in making the transition to teaching EAP. So what this means is that teachers tend to fall back on the constructs and beliefs derived from their previous experience of CLT teaching when changing to the EAP teaching context. For reflective teachers, their first experience of teaching EAP can leave them feeling de-skilled, as they report, because they lose their sense of expertise along with their confidence, and effectively they revert to the status of pre-service teachers in relation to EAP teaching. Other teachers can be reluctant to acknowledge that they need to change to a new construct of teaching. So this can create barriers to effective teaching and efficient learning in what is, after all, a high-stakes enterprise for the students involved. I wanted to find out which of the beliefs that teachers hold might constitute barriers or success factors for teaching EAP. Access EAP Foundations challenges a fundamental belief that many teachers hold, that EAP can't be taught until learners have mastered a basic foundation of core grammatical structures. So in my paper, I began by reviewing the literature to demonstrate the main differences between teaching CLT and EAP, and it's these differences which might have shaped teachers' constructs of pre-intermediate level teaching. For example, CLT tends to focus on spoken interaction to achieve social purposes, such as expressing personal opinions on topical issues, while EAP involves helping students to understand and produce academic texts. To facilitate this understanding, EAP adopts a deep-end approach, in which learners at all levels are taught at or near the target level, but their performance is scaffolded with carefully stepped tasks. As they interact with authentic texts and tasks from their discipline, they learn the grammatical structures relevant to their needs. Because of this focus on academic texts, EAP requires teachers to understand how to analyse academic discourse so that they can help students to identify academics' text structure and style in texts from their disciplines. Now, this can be pretty challenging for a teacher whose main focus has been on creating classroom opportunities for oral interaction. Access EAP Foundations was piloted with 2 teachers who were relative newcomers to teaching EAP, and they were teaching 1 class of 10 students who all came from the Middle East. Each week I carried out interviews with the teachers to evaluate the new course book and their impression of it. I asked them about their impression of the materials, how the students responded to them, and whether the teachers had to change the way they normally taught students at this level. I recorded and transcribed the interviews and analysed the transcripts to find evidence of underlying beliefs. I focused on places in the transcript where teachers used evaluative adjectives or metaphors in their narratives of classroom activities. For example, one of the teachers used quite negative metaphors in relation to eliciting ideas from students. So he would say things like, I had to bully them to come up with something, or I had to feed them ideas, which suggested to me that he did not believe that it was appropriate to scaffold the student's performance. And both teachers tended to frame their talk using language structures. So they would say things like, you should try whenever possible to use the passive, rather than using language functions such as process or comparison, or genres such as methodology recount, to talk about what they were doing in class. So I took the interview transcripts and analysed them to identify recurring themes. And this gave me 23 contrasting pairs of statements, of belief statements, which I labelled as barriers or success factors for EAP teaching. And this was based on my own interpretation of the literature that I'd reviewed. An example of a contrasting pair of beliefs in relation to lesson aims is the following. So, a teacher should explain the aims of a lesson to help students to reflect on their learning, or contrasted with, a teacher need not explain the aims of a lesson because reflection is not important at this level. So this was a very subjective evaluation of what these teachers had said. And in order to validate my thematic analysis and interpretation, I sought the expert opinions of members of the BALEAP community through an online questionnaire, which I made available from June to September 2010. And it was completed by 124 teachers who are working probably on summer pre-sessional courses in the UK. So we would say experts in EAP teaching. Respondents were asked to select one belief statement from each of the 23 pairs. Even if they weren't sure, they should try to choose the belief statement that best fit their view. So if a high percentage of respondents selected a belief, then it was confirmed as a success factor for teaching EAP. And if few selected it, then it perhaps could be regarded as a possible barrier to effective EAP teaching. So the survey results challenged some traditional beliefs about teaching low-level learners. But they also show that a sizable minority of the respondents continue to hold beliefs that might constitute barriers to successful EAP teaching. For example, most respondents agreed that students with a low proficiency level are quite capable of discussing academic concepts, and they also believe that the teacher should relate classroom tasks and activities to the university context, even at this level. The majority thought that students needed to build up functional vocabulary for comparing, defining or discussing problems, rather than topic-based vocabulary, and that this could be done using academic texts. Just over 2/3 of the respondents agreed that students should learn the grammar of noun phrases to help them to understand the complex and highly nominalised style of academic texts. And they also believe that students should be supported to perform upon their current level of competence. However, 1/3 of these EAP teachers still viewed language in terms of the traditional structural syllabus, which focuses on verb tenses rather than complex noun phrases. They considered that students should be taught at or near their level of competence. Now, the problem with this approach is that it distances the learners from their academic contexts, where texts are complex and difficult to process. The lack of engagement with authentic text makes it much more difficult for learners to transfer language and skills learned in the EAP class to performance in their studies. So in conclusion, it's important to note that teachers' beliefs are not fixed, but they form part of a complex and dynamic system in which contrasting beliefs may be in tension. Teachers can change their beliefs if they become aware of the need to do so. So an important outcome of this study is the reflective questionnaire, which I present as an appendix to the published article, and which can be used during teacher induction or teacher training courses to stimulate teachers to reflect on their beliefs and the extent to which these are appropriate for EAP teaching.